kept showing up on the side of the road completely unrecognizable, and no one could figure out how they ended up that way until police looked inside this van. They were heading to Delaware to talk about this absolute psychopath, Stephen Brian Pennell. And unlike most serial killers we've talked about, Stephen did not have a rough childhood. He grew up in a regular home without any violence or abuse allegations. Instead, he was just a regular, awkward, quiet kid. And as a kid, he always wanted to help people, and for him, the ultimate way to do that was becoming a cop. And he was so obsessed with that dream that he would literally wait outside of his house for his neighborhood officer to come home and ask him a whole bunch of questions about his job and solving crime. And when he was old enough, Stephen applied for his town's police cadet program. But by that point, he was like 6'5" and pushing 300 pounds, so physically he just wasn't there and couldn't pass the fitness test. So instead, he takes a few classes at the University of Delaware for, get this, criminal justice. He ends up studying the same exact system that eventually takes him down. Kind of ironic, right? But just like everything else, he fails at that too. He couldn't finish school, he couldn't become a cop, so eventually he just settles down and becomes an electrician. He ends up finding a woman, getting married, and has 2 kids, and for a while, he plays that perfect husband role pretty well. But at some point, he gets so tired of pretending to be somebody he's not, and so he spends his days driving around in his blue van, just circling the highways. He's just watching women, specifically the ones who are hitchhiking alone. And after seeing how vulnerable and alone these women are, he starts getting this strange urge to hurt them. And when he couldn't resist that urge, he gave into it. It started with Shirley Ellis. She was 23 years old, a nurse, and just trying to do something kind. It was a few days after Thanksgiving, and she was hitchhiking to the hospital to bring her patient some food, and as she's walking, Stephen pulls up beside her in that blue van. It's cold, it's late, and the hospital is like 14 miles away, and so when Stephen asks if she would like a ride, she says yes. And just like that, she gets in, probably thinking she just saved herself from a long walk. But she had no idea, the moment she walked inside that van, she just signed her own death sentence. Because instead of taking her to the hospital, Stephen drives her into this construction site, and I'm not going to say what he did to her because it's that bad. But just know, whatever your worst thought is, it was worse. And when he was done, he dumped her body in the dirt and just left her exposed like trash. And it's not the police who find her, it was 2 teenagers just driving around. They see something in the dark, and at first they're like, oh look, somebody left a mannequin on the ground. But as they get closer, they realize it was a woman who was no longer alive. They freak out, immediately calling 911. And when investigators show up, they see these really deep marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck, and so they assume it was some kind of SA. But here's where it gets more disturbing. There were no signs of SA on her at all, which is terrifying if you really think about it, because that means it wasn't just about to him. It was about control and his fantasies of wanting to make someone suffer. And as investigators look closer to her body, they find these tiny blue fabrics stuck to her skin, and it was barely noticeable, but it was enough to make them wonder, did this come from a carpet or even the inside of someone's vehicle? But other than that blue fiber, they've got nothing else to go on. Meanwhile, Stephen is over here reliving every single second of it for the next 7 months until eventually he decides to do it again. So on June 28th, he hops in his van and heads back out. He pulls up right next to her and says whatever it is he thinks will make her feel safe. And somehow it works, because she gets in the van, and that was the last time anyone sees her alive. By the next morning, just after 6, a whole bunch of construction workers show up to their work site per usual, except this time they find a body just out in the open. It was a woman named Catherine. She was 31 years old, a mother, and Stephen left her out there fully exposed, dumped in the dirt, as if her role was fully fulfilled. But what makes it worse is the way he left her, because this time her whole body was covered in this blue fiber. And not just a couple here and there, I mean everywhere, which means whatever happened to her, he did it right there on that same carpet with no attempt to hide it. And when they sent her in to get an autopsy, it was the same horrifying acts that was done to Shirley. But the thing is, there were no signs of SA on her either, so he's just doing this for fun. And with all these clues being left behind in the same manner, police are like, yeah, we're dealing with a serial killer. So they send out an undercover female officer to pose as a hitchhiker. She's wired up and walking along Route 40, just waiting for somebody sketchy to stop next to her. But even with all this effort, he slips right through their fingers.